When China talks economics, the world sit up and listen. And oh boy, are people listening this week. Over the last 2 days, China's top leadership gathered in Beijing to review this year's economic performance and set out the tasks for the next year. During the much anticipated annual Central Economic Work Conference, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced vigorous efforts to boost consumption, improve investment efficiency, and expand domestic demand on all fronts. He called for more proactive and impactful macro policies to sustain the upward trend of the economy. Now, the messages came on the heels of a raft of major policies beginning in late September to shore up the world's second largest economy. So let's talk economics today. I'm not an economics major, but I'll try to make it interesting. I have to understand first. But what is the real situation of China's domestic demand and consumption? How does it compare to other countries, and how will China's new measures impact you? Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Beijing by Zhou Mi, Deputy Director of the Institute of American and Oceania Study at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. From Portland, Oregon, Professor Liang Yan, Kremer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University, and from Shanghai, Joseph Mahoney, Professor at East China Normal University. Welcome to all of you to The Point. Now, let's talk about China's consumer confidence. That has been the hot word for quite a while, but a study by the multinational firm McKinsey, published in September, titled "The Truth About Chinese Consumption," actually debunked 3 myths about the Chinese economy. Specifically, myth 1, that China's consumption is facing a crisis. Myth 2, Chinese consumers have lost their appetite for luxury goods. And myth 3, foreign companies are exiting China in droves. Just to focus on myth 1 about consumption, the McKinsey report actually finds that Chinese consumers are, quote unquote, among the most confident in the world. 59% of Chinese consumers view the economy optimistically, compared with just 40% of American consumers, 30% in the UK, and 13% of Japanese consumers. I want to start with Mr. Zhou. Exactly what is the truth about Chinese consumer confidence, looking from this international perspective?
Yes, from this research, I think that is very important to know that Chinese consumers are not the same as the Western consumers. Maybe we are not trying to do the same behaviors as for the Western consumers. So for the confidence, I think that consumers are dependent on their income nowadays and also the potential income for the coming days. So when they are provided with so many different products, they have to choose what kind of things they want to consume today and what kind of things they can do it in the next few days. Actually, I just visited Canada in the last month, and I visited to buy, to trying to look at some luxury products, as you mentioned, but I don't think that many of our companies are really interested in buying them, not only because they are very expensive, but also I think that there are so many similar functions products here in China, so we can have a lot of choices. As for the consumer's confidence, it is very important to know what we can get as the income. And I believe that the people are really trying to get more income as, we are seeing so many uncertainties imposed by Western economies and so many other countries. So we have to try to do more to have more confidence on the abilities of us to buy in the coming days.
Professor Liang, how do you look at this seemingly diverging trends on the international level? Chinese consumer confidence is high and higher than, for instance, that of the United States. But on the other hand, according to the Chinese leadership, there is a consumer confidence to be further boosted. How do you square these two?
Right. Good to talk to you, Liu Xing. So first of all, I wanted to debunk the myth that, again, China's consumption is a crisis. The matter of fact is that, when you look at the past 20 years, China's consumption growth on average, it grows at about 8% year on year. And that is more than double the world average growth in consumption, which is about 3%. But in China, I think there are a couple issues here. That one, consumption is somewhat undercounted because of relatively low service consumption. As we know, for example, housing, it's only about 22% of China's household consumption, and in the US, that's about 33%. So the fact that we're making housing more affordable and making healthcare education more affordable in China and reduce the service consumption expenses, it's not really a weak point or weak sign of China's, really the strength, and also, reducing the prices of a lot of manufactured goods and passing the benefits of large scale production onto consumer benefits. And I think that is a good thing. But in terms of, confidence, I think let's not forget, the long COVID scarring effect is taking some toll on the Chinese consumers. And also the property market readjustments, the stock market readjustments has somewhat reduced some of the positive wealth effect on the Chinese consumers. And so one thing that we noticed is that the Chinese household income is actually growing, with the GDP growth rate in the past decades. So it's not that the Chinese people don't have the money that they can't spend. But rather, I think, there is very high savings on the Chinese households' part. When we look at, especially, during COVID years, from January 2020 to August this year, Chinese households increased their, the bank deposits by 9 trillion. Not increase, the total household deposits now has swollen, yes, to 9 trillion US dollars. And so I think that just shows that it's not about the lack of sort of the consumption, right? There is some sort of confidence issues that the households like to squirrel away some of their income in terms of their precautionary savings, saving for the old age, saving, when the stock market is right and the housing market is right, so that they can go in to purchase those assets, or they're saving because the social safety net is still relatively weak. And so all of this, I think, in some ways mean that, there is room to boost consumption, consumer confidence. But again, to say that the consumption is in the crisis, I think that is an over-exaggeration and also distortion.
Professor Mahoney, you live here in China and you lived through, the very difficult years of the COVID time. What is your sense of the pulse of the Chinese economy, both from what people are talking about, what people are worried about, and from reading the reports both in China and internationally? What is your feel of the nuanced situation when it comes to consumption?
Well, I think that what we can take away from the marching orders that have been issued in Beijing is that that China can improve and needs to improve both domestic demand and consumption levels. Now, it's probably helpful here for us to focus on what the central issue is. And that is that the Chinese economy depends disproportionately on international demand in an era of economic transition away from export-led growth. And if we had higher domestic consumption levels, then this might not only improve the quality of life for our more Chinese people, it might also make China's economic growth rates less vulnerable to international demand, which, as we've seen, can wax and wane depending on geopolitical and global economic factors, as well as black swan events like the pandemic. So I concur with you that it's probably wrong to promote the idea that there's some sort of gross problem in terms of Chinese consumer confidence or even domestic demand. It's simply that we're in an era where we need to see domestic consumption, domestic demand picking up some of the slack to make China less vulnerable to the sorts of problems that it's encountered in recent years. Again, not just the pandemic, but what we've seen in terms of the trade war and the other challenges being advanced by Washington, and that might intensify once again with a new president in Washington.
Well, one of the key messages coming out of the meeting over the last 2 days is this one, which says outlining a number of key tasks for 2025. The meeting urged efforts to vigorously boost consumption, improve investment efficiency, and expand domestic demand on all fronts. This is a rather, strong statement for me, and it's with very obvious importance attached to it. Professor Zhou, help us understand the tone or behind the terminology. When you hear the central leadership talk about urgent efforts and vigorously and on all fronts, what does that mean? And if China's consumption is not a crisis, why is the central leadership putting so much emphasis on boosting consumption?
Yeah, I agree with you that if you're looking at the terminology, the consumption has been placed in a very important or even vital position in the economic activities. Well, it is true that we are not trying to change a lot of policies. We are trying to continue our policies as always. Consumption has been one of our priority for so many years. Before I just came into our academy, I think that we all already heard about a lot of things to boost the consumptions. Well, it is not a very easy task in the past, and we continuously do a lot of jobs to promote a better position for the consumption. But this year, for the next, the 2025, it is different because I think that the world is under change, under a lot of pressures, and especially for the most important economies in the world, like China, as a very big economy, we have to depend too much on ourselves. I think it's not only about the growth, the pillars of the strength of the development, but also about our attitude towards the world, because the world is facing so many uncertainties. If we are going to do more, we have to have a very independent abilities to sustain in this environment. The consumption is definitely one of our priorities, but when we are seeing that people here in China are getting more income, they deserve to have a better consumption products and services. So we have put that in the first position to trying to use all kinds of methods to boost the consumption. It is not only about to give some choices to the economy, but also trying to give more help for the people who are going to have a better life.
So let's take a look at some of the measures that China has rolled out. Basically, China has been trying to boost consumption for some time. For instance, in March, China unveiled an action plan to advance large-scale equipment upgrades and consumer goods trade-ins. Of course, this is only one way to boost consumption. Professor Liang, how do you look at these measures? How tailored are they for the Chinese circumstances, and why they're taking these particular approaches instead of, for instance, cash handouts?
Yeah, I think, again, just to put this in perspective, the reason that consumption demand is important, as the Central World Economic Conference readout says, this is really the link between economic growth and also boosting living standards of the people. So it's always good to, boost domestic demand, especially, when the external market becomes more uncertain. Now, when it comes to specific measures, you mentioned the trade-in programs and also large-scale equipment upgrade, and they have been quite successful. So, for example, the investment in industrial equipment has gone up by 16% in the first 3 quarters in China, and that contributed to 60% of the investment growth. And when it comes to the appliances and consumer electronics, audio, video equipment, all these using the old to exchange for the new, that has really also boosted hundreds of billions of yuan's sales, and that also contributed to all these sales increase by over 39% for some of the specific appliances and home equipment.
Right.
So I think these are direct measures to boost consumption, and the reason that I think these are in some ways superior than cash handout is because a lot of the evidence has shown in other countries, right, that when you give cash out, a lot of times people simply save the money or use it to pay off their debt. So it's not clear how much that cash out would really being spent in the economy. And also, I think for China is we're seeing tremendous growth in the supply side capacity, right? The advanced manufacturing capacity has grown by leaps and bounds. And so that really amounts to a rightward shift of the supply curve, so to speak. And so that's why I think, when you boosted consumption demand directly on some of these manufacturing products, that would help to balance the supply and the demand. And I think that is what I think the government will continue to work on, instead of giving cash handouts, because otherwise you have to do it continuously, and that amounts to I would say, income guarantee kind of programs. It's not that it cannot be done, but I think, again, depends on what the purpose of the policy is. You can still boost low-income families, income supplements. You can still increase pensions and so on and so forth. But I don't think this is really the measure to boost consumption demand.
All right. Well, Professor Liang Yi did very good research. Actually, I'm going to repeat some of the numbers because they're quite outstanding. For instance, driven by the national trading programs, household appliances and audiovisual equipment, meaning, for instance, television, reported a 40% surge in combined sales compared to a year earlier. And the sales of stationery and office supplies jumped almost 20%. Furniture and automobiles also saw increases of 7.4% and 4% in sales, respectively. Professor Mahoney, for me, that sounds like the moment that the policy is there, it's kind of working. What is your observation? Is that working, or what else needs to be done?
Well, again, I think the real point here is not that China has unhealthy levels, but that there's a need to have sort of even stronger levels to help accommodate this economic transition and these headwinds that are being faced internationally. So it's not about an unhealthy level of consumer confidence. It's not about an unhealthy level of domestic demand. It's about needing to increase those in order to make China more self-reliant when facing these challenges. So again, I think that what we've seen are a number of structural adjustments that have started to produce positive results. It's just that everyone right now is concerned about what kind of challenges we're going to face in the new year. There have been a number of threats voiced very clearly. Although we don't really know how to take Trump at his word, because he says one thing one day and another the next. But there have been clear concerns expressed, and certainly some of the people that he's chosen to populate his administration who have very hawkish stands against China. So I think that there's simply some very prudent planning on the part of Beijing that China may need to be able to stand more resolutely on its own in the coming year.
Okay, I get your point. Professor Zhou, do you agree with Professor Mahoney in that this is the broad context of the sets of measures China is rolling out pretty much to prepare for the future full of uncertainty? Or China really does see, because of the past few years of multiple factors, that there is a dip in consumer confidence, which must be shored up? Because although there is no, crisis in terms of consumer confidence, there has been a major market dip in consumer confidence compared to China's past record.
Yeah, I think that both are right. As for the rules, we have to look at the cycle. The life cycle of the products. Maybe we are very strong in the production aspect, and we are not as strong as in the consumption part. So actually, these measures are trying to address these challenges, make our supply chains or the life cycle of the products more sustainable and connected with each other. So the consumption is one of our priority for us to address the people's demands in the development, and we have to address that. Well, for the other side, if you are looking at the world, because China is a very active partner in the world for the trade, so we are a very big export for so many different kinds of products. If some countries are trying to build a wall, they want to stop to import things from China, how can we deal with these products? So we need to find a more balanced way for the production of those products, and it's definitely one of the priorities, not only for us, but for all of our trading partners. They have to find out the better ways to deal with the situation. Well, the consumption is not a problem about only the products. It also have very close relations with the financial deposit, the savings, and also a lot of expectations.
Right.
So the confidence is one aspect, but we have to consider about what we can have for the better cycles
Okay.
cooperation.
Well, China has, as I said, is going to adopt a moderately loose monetary policy for the next year, and there will also be reduction in the reserve requirement ratio and interest rates as at an appropriate timing to ensure ample liquidity. That's also another key message coming out of the meeting, for instance, deficit to GDP ratio. Professor Zhou, let me stay with you on that. Are these connected? Are China rolling out different measures on different fronts, fiscal, financial, monetary, to achieve relatively the same goal?
Yeah, actually, I think there are some very active signals being sent by these meetings that we are doing more active in trying to support the economy. But it's not only on one aspect. So we are going to use the systematical ways of dealing with these policies and trying to use the integrated measurement to deal with the uncertainties. I think it's very helpful for us to boost the consumption by having a better environment for the people to do more consumption, and also for the enterprises, because the people are having the income from the enterprises. If the enterprises are getting better, they can have more income.
Professor Liang, what are your reading from this meeting? How specifically, how is this going to impact foreign businesses operating in China or in their original country, and foreign consumers possibly?
Right. So I think the way I read this conference is that, for one, there is a very clear understanding of the short-term economic headwinds, but also really the long-term potential of China's structural transformation and its sustainable growth. And for two, I think you mentioned a slew of policies. The more proactive fiscal policy sounds really encouraging, but also moderately loose monetary policy. Now, when it comes to foreign investors, I think, again, they need to be mindful of, China is not only a manufacturing powerhouse. And so a lot of the supply chain, really stays in China. You cannot really cut China off of some of the very important industrial supply chain. So if you are efficiency seeking, I don't think that you can completely, exit the Chinese markets. Now, if you're market seeking, again, this is a growing economy with 400 million strong middle class, with really high, purchasing power, as you just mentioned, luxury markets. China, consumed about $101.7 billion of luxury goods just last year. And it is an annual growth of 7%. And by 2030, China is going to account for 45 to 50% of the global luxury market. So if you are market-seeking investors, I don't think you want to exit China either. But of course, because Chinese market is changing and evolving, I think investors really need to think about what are the sectors they're able to enter and make profits, right? So, for example, in the automobile markets, it's very competitive in mobile phones and so on and so forth. Right. I think it just takes time for the foreign businesses to understand the changing landscape in China and where their market niche is and how to really compete in the market.
How about the ordinary consumers? For instance, an American resident. How is China's doing better in domestic consumption potentially affecting them? Is it affecting them at all?
Yes, absolutely. From a macro level, China imported about $2.56 trillion dollars of goods last year. So this is a tremendous market for foreign sellers. And for consumers, I live in the United States, and I know how popular Temu and Shein and all these are. And in fact, those two are the top apps that are downloaded in the United States. So I think a lot of these competitive priced and also great variety of products have become very popular in the United States, especially for middle and low income families. I think they really rely a lot on these imports from China. And so I think going back to Professor Mahoney talked about these Trump's pledge of tariff hikes. This is going to cost average American households $2,600, according to the Peterson Institute of International Economics. So I think, again, the world is very integrated, and I think this interdependence is good for businesses and good for consumers. And unfortunately, I think politicians have their own calculations, but hopefully, we'll be able to, cope with these challenges and move forward.
Professor Mahoney, from a geopolitical point of view, are you seeing the signals, the right kind of signals that you need to see in order to have some kind of stability, at least from one side of the Pacific, coming out of the Chinese side, from the wording of the meeting, from the messages that are sent out? This is not just about economics, for sure.
Well, I think we can address this in part by directly addressing your previous question, which is, I think one of the key messages that's being sent out around the world, not just to foreign governments, but to foreign companies, is that although we know that consumer confidence and demand in China are not unhealthy, they're not in a crisis, they're about to get stronger. And if you want to have access to this market, you need to be in this market. But another thing that I think foreign companies have had to learn, it's been very difficult for some of them to learn, and some of them have not been able to learn it or adjust, is that you really have to be competitive now in China. I think one of the reasons that we've seen some firms leaving China is not because they're finding a cheaper labor market elsewhere, but because they're just not able to compete with other foreign firms or with Chinese firms that are operating in this market now. This market is very sophisticated. Chinese consumers are increasingly sophisticated. And if you want to be here and earn some of their money, you have to really be part of the game. So, these foreign firms, they need to step up their own game, and they need to pressure their own governments not to take aggressive positions that might freeze them out of part of the Chinese pie.
Mr. Zhou, what should foreign businesses look for? If you are a foreign viewer and you have been steeped in getting information from the international media, you would be asking questions about whether foreign businesses will be treated equally as their Chinese counterparts in the effort of China to boost domestic demand and consumption. How will foreign businesses and foreign competitors be treated? Can we get some kind of guarantees on that front?
Yeah, I think that's examples we observed yesterday that we saw the Cybertruck has get the permission to be sold in China. So actually, even the Tesla is getting a very fair treatment in Chinese market. From the terminology of this meeting, I think that it's very clear that we want to stabilize the foreign investment. So we are trying to provide them with a better treatment. It's not only about the different treatment compared with Chinese own companies, but also have a fair competition environment. As we have discussed, that Chinese companies are very competitive and they are really wanting to go into the upside of the competition. So if the foreign companies want to be here, yes, it is okay, but we have to learn how can we compete in a fair position and trying to look at the different and also some very special market that we can try to do. So actually, China market is very big, and we are in the stage of urbanization. We have so many areas to develop, not only for the developed areas in China, but so many other areas. So we have so many different demands. The problem is how can we provide the better trade, better goods and services to them in which way? So there are so many potentials. We have to have more confidence.
And that confidence seems to be shared by global consultancy. For instance, this joint study of the global consultancy Bain and Company and market research firm Kantar World Panel finds that China's consumer market, stuck in a deflationary spiral, is poised to stage a recovery next year, buoyed by Beijing's proactive fiscal policies and distribution of retail vouchers by local governments. That's according to the joint study. And this forecast was made just one day after China announced it will shift its monetary policy from prudent to moderate loose. Let's keep a close watch on the situation and see whether the market reacts, whether consumers react positively to these signals and the actual measures that will come out. Many thanks to my guests, Mr. Zhou Mi, who is Deputy Director of the Institute of American and Oceania Study at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, Professor Liang Yan, Kramer Chair Professor of Economics at William Metz University in the United States, and Joseph Mahoney, Professor at East China Normal University, joining us from Shanghai. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.